Hi everyone, thank you for joining us tonight for our last webinar of the week, which is looking after your money during COVID and beyond. My name is Molly Kilty and I'm going to be hosting for you tonight. I am a third year mental health student nurse at the University, also the vice chairperson of the RCN Students Committee, and I represent the East Midlands. So we are joined today by Craig Davidson, who is a newly qualified nurse, and Claire Cannings, who is part of the RCN membership services. So I shall pass over to Craig and Claire. So Craig, if you would like to introduce yourself first.
Hi, my name's Craig Davidson. I am a newly qualified nurse. I've just finished my third week. So I have started working in the middle of the pandemic in an infectious diseases ward. I've been quite involved in the RCN all the time I was a student. I used to be the Scottish representative in the committee, and then I was the chair last year. And now I'm on the steering committee of the Nurses in Management and Leadership Forum, and I'm one of the curators of RCN Newly Qualified Nurses. So thank you very much for having me on tonight, Molly.
You're most welcome, Craig. Sounds very exciting. And Claire, if you could say a few words about yourself, that'd be brilliant.
If you could just unmute yourself, Claire.
I thought I had, sorry. Thanks, Molly. My name's Claire Cannings. I'm the Senior Welfare Advisor at the Royal College of Nursing. I've worked at the college for a little over 15 years now. And prior to that, I was a student advisor at King's College, mostly working in the Nightingale Institute. I head up a small team of advisors at the RCN. We mainly provide benefits advice and we do DWP appeals. We've also got a licence to provide debt counselling and money advice to RCN members.
Brilliant, thanks Claire. So if you haven't joined our webinars this week, I'm just going to go through what we do. So I've got a few pre-prepared questions I'm going to be asking both Craig and Claire, and then we're going to have a bit of a discussion, and then at the end those watching at home, you can input some questions that you wish to ask the guests yourself, and right at the end we can go through them and have some quick fire questions, which will be fun. So I'm going to start with the first question, which is for Claire, which is a simple one. What is your #1 top money saving tip?
Thanks, Molly. Remember to unmute that time. Gosh, this is a hard one because there's obviously quite a lot to choose from, but I guess a lot of them are only relevant in kind of certain circumstances. So I want to choose one that's pretty much works for everybody, really, regardless of your age or where you're studying or your financial situation. So for me, I think that top tip would have to be setting some time aside every month to review your finances and do a bit of budget planning. Might sound a bit simple or actually maybe a little bit boring, but many students that we speak to avoid doing this completely. I think that they might find it a little bit intimidating, and I can completely understand why that might be. I think when you can look at your student finances and see that it barely covers your rent, then you may not want to sit down and go through, in a lot of detail. And some students, and I guess this probably doesn't just apply to students, it applies to everybody, they just decide that they're going to try and wing it and hope for the best and see how they get through to the end of the term. And the problem, unfortunately, with winging it is that it often comes unstuck, and so they find themselves in quite a difficult financial situation and kind of at crisis point. So that would be my probably my top tip for everybody. Set some time aside every month. You can start off by just doing a really basic budget. There's one on the RCN website. Money Saving Expert's got some really good ones, and there's some great apps where you can just put in your expenditure every month. I think a good starting point for a lot of people is to try and pay for everything by your card rather than cash. And I think at the moment everybody will find that a lot easier anyway, because a lot of shops obviously aren't taking cash. I mean, it's probably not at the moment a typical month for a lot of people, so you might want to go back sort of through previous months' bank statements and just go through, see what your regular savings are. And when you've got that starting point, and then you can start reviewing every month, see where you're going. And once you've got that starting point, you can start setting goals. I mean, it doesn't matter what those goals are, because everybody's got different finances. We're all aiming for different things. Some people are just hoping to get to the end of the month without extending their overdraft. Other people are thinking about saving. It's just that you'll find it easier to save money when you're sort of understanding where your starting point is and when you've got a better overview of your finances. So I think that would be my top tip. And if I can be a little bit cheeky, I'd probably like to throw another one in there, because I think that probably there'll be a few students watching who have at the moment kind of got dual status. So they're full-time students and they're full-time or part-time employees. I would say just exploit the hell out of that situation. There'll be certain situations where you can take advantage of being a full-time student. So you've got your council tax exemption, you've got your student discounts. And then there will be other situations where being the employee will be better for you. So for certain benefits situations, it's better off to be the employee rather than the student. So if you're claiming benefits, you might just want to check to see whether or not you're better off being the student or the employee. There's some cracking NHS discounts out there at the moment, so use those as well if you can. So yeah, just use that dual status, I would say, as well. So that was a bit cheeky because that's 2, but...
Oh, that's brilliant, Claire. I never thought of the dual status one, actually, and it's something I'm definitely going to consider. My next question is for Craig. So we've got some students might find it difficult to start saving, especially with how things are right now. What is something that you would recommend doing?
Thanks, Molly. I think what Claire has said there is absolutely essential. Just really getting on top of your finances and budgeting. I was terrible when I was first a student. I'm not going to lie, I wasn't great at all. And I think one thing that we forget is we check our bank balance, and banks have this lovely bit at the top where it says available to spend. But it isn't available to spend because 2 days later, you might have one direct debit coming out, then you've got your phone bill, and you need to remember what is going on. And there's lots of apps out there that actually help you work out what your available to spend balance actually is when you account for all that. I think a good thing to do is, if you know when your money is going in, or if you're a student who gets a bursary, you know the date your bursary is going in, or your student loan, it's good to try and move all your direct debits and all your payments to as soon as possible after that happens, so that money comes out and you aren't spending and having to extend overdrafts thinking that that's coming along. I also, one thing I did as a student, and I'm now continuing in my newly qualified post, is set up a standing order to take a small amount. It doesn't need to be much, like it could be as little as £10–20 every month, and put that straight into a savings account, because again, that's not money that you're going to touch. I would advise though to either go for an ISA or a savings account where you need to give 30 days notice to lift it, because what I used to do was transfer it to an instant savings account and then 2 hours later pull it back out into my main account. So if it's one that you have to take money back out of. And I think for students that are, because we know what it's like, particularly in England where there isn't the bursary, people don't have a great deal of finances. So think of the little things you can do, like when you're going on to placement, or if you're students at the moment who are out working on their extended clinical placements, take your own food with you. I know where I work at the moment, the only place we've got to buy food is a Marks and Spencer's. So if I bought my lunch there every day, I'd have no money come 2 weeks into the month. So take your own food with you. The amount of money you could save if you take, I'm saying that we can't do it at the moment with COVID, but once COVID is over, if you take a reusable cup with coffee, because $2.60 is average what you would spend on just a black coffee from a coffee place every day, and that amounts up over the month. Saying that, you could take your disposable cup with coffee from home and then fill it up with coffee at work. So just think of ways that you can really cut corners and save money like that. I think I was also talking to my friend Claire earlier, who mentioned a great thing that I hadn't ever thought of, which is like a skill swap. So if there's something that you can do, for example, I cannot sew or do anything like that, but if I needed someone that could sew curtains, Claire could sew me a pair of curtains and I could do a service for her, and we do some sort of exchange. So things like that. And also, if there are, particularly for students who are not in this current time where they're on their extended placements and being paid, but who might do bank work while they are students, if you are eligible for working tax credits, you can save money with the government. And for every £1 you save, they contribute 50p, and that's money that you can't touch, and that lasts for 4 years. So that's an option there. So yeah, there's quite a few things you can do, and I certainly need to do it myself, as I'm supposed to be saving for a wedding and self-funding a master's starting in September. So I'm going to come to Claire for any advice she can offer me.
Thank you, Craig. So that is some brilliant advice, and I think, especially when you said about the putting money in your savings and then taking it back out, that is something that I know I can be quite guilty of. Even if it starts off as like, oh, just need that extra £10, and then it just escalates and things like that. But yeah. So my next question is for Claire. Many students are worried about how their student finance might be affected because they're going to be paid on placement, and I know some of them may also have benefits as well, which they may be worried about. So what advice would you give to those students?
Thanks, Molly. That's such a brilliant question, and it's the main one that we've been receiving through to the welfare service from students who are starting their placements. So it's quite a big topic. I've written some notes down, so excuse me if you're hearing rustling paper, because there was so many issues that came up through this that I thought it was important that I just make a note of them, and I'll try and work through as many as possible. I think the most important thing to mention initially is that the student finance continues regardless. The only caveat to that really is that there's certain additional elements that might change. So your placement expenses, for example, might be paid by your placement rather than via the student funding channel. I know that's particularly the case, and we've got that clarified for Northern Ireland. So if there are any issues, if you're not receiving your student funding, you really should seek advice from the university so that can be sorted. But I haven't heard that that's a major issue for any of our students. One of the big things is the impact on benefits. We've had lots of students who are currently receiving benefits who are very concerned about the impact. Now, the majority of benefits are means tested. So if you've got a salary coming in, it is going to impact on benefits, but it impacts on different benefits in different ways. So for example, if you're currently receiving tax credits, that's an annual entitlement. So it is means tested, and you do need to let the HMRC know that you've got an income coming in, but they will attribute your earnings over the year, and they will reassess your entitlement at year end. So we've just come into a new financial year, so give them a call if you can get through, or email them if you can't. Let them know that you've started work, and they will do a reassessment. You got an idea now, most people, approximately how much you're going to be earning a month. So if you give them that figure, They'll either do an interim reassessment for you, or they will reassess it at the end of the year. The only issue with them reassessing at the end of the year is that you might have a slight overpayment, but then you can pay that over subsequent years. Another major worry for students starting the placement is that they're very concerned that if they start work, then they will be advised that they will lose their tax credits and they will have to move over to universal credit. Now, that's a major concern because under the universal credit regulations, students are a lot worse off. So obviously that's a big concern if you're starting work now and then you're wanting, if you're in a second year student going back into the third year and you're on a benefit that's providing you with maybe £300 a month now, and you might lose that in your third year. I think it's really important to say that that shouldn't trigger a change to universal credit. Not to say that it won't, because you know, the universal credit and the Department for Work and Pensions are sometimes a little bit of a rule unto themselves. But if it does happen, then we can put an appeal in for you. So the Welfare Service will be able to appeal that decision. So firstly, it shouldn't happen. But if it does, don't worry, we'll be fighting your corner for you and making sure that that's reversed. Another thing that's come up is tax. Should students be paying tax? There's a slight misconception that students shouldn't be paying tax. It's not to do with your student status. It's to do with the tax-free limit, which is currently £12,500 before you start paying tax. And again, because we've started a new financial year, if you look at your payslip, if tax is coming out already, then you can ask for your payroll department to adjust your tax code, and then a refund should be automatic. So the key here is just to keep an eye on your payslip. And also something that's come up within the past couple of weeks, a couple of students have contacted us to say that student loan payments have started being taken out of their pay. That absolutely shouldn't be happening. If it is happening, and again, look at your pay slip, it shouldn't be a large amount, but if it is, then you need to get in touch with your payroll department and ask them to adjust your tax, your codes for that. So yeah, there's quite a few issues, and I, no doubt that there will be more that come up, but hopefully that covers some of them. Thanks, Molly.
Thank you so much, Claire. I bet there's loads of students watching that feel a bit more at ease now with that, because I know, especially, I've heard of student loan payments being taken out, which obviously, like you said, shouldn't be happening. So I've got another question for you, Craig. What is some advice that you would give to students who will soon be receiving a proper wage as a newly qualified nurse? And this is kind of something that I was thinking about. How can they be careful not to splurge with having that more disposable income compared to when they were a student? And how do they not make this a habit?
Very good question. I just had my first wage there. I think I'll caveat it at the start with saying I think it's fine to treat yourself a little bit when it's your first job, your first pay. I mean, go out and buy yourself a new pair of trainers or something nice to treat yourself for that first wage. But just be aware that it doesn't become a regular thing. Like, it's a little present to yourself for getting that job. I think there's lots of things you can do with your wage, and I actually learned this from my some of my colleagues I was working with this week that I wasn't aware you could do. Things like your RCN membership or any trade union membership and your NMC, the money you pay for the NMC. If you phone up HMRC, they are then tax deductible from your wage, and also you can have uniform allowance. So there's a certain amount of money for cleaning uniforms, for buying work shoes, that is all tax claimable through HMRC, and then that adjusts your tax code in your wage. So that's really great advice that I have just learned this week. So I am planning to call up HMRC on Wednesday, on my next day off, to try and get that put in. Again, it's sort of similar to when you were a student. I think it is really important that you remember to try and save little and often. I think, again, know when your wage is coming in and pull all your direct debits and standing orders to near that date, because you don't want to be getting further into the month and being like, oh goodness, have to extend your overdraft or have to buy things on a credit card, which is then going to rack up serious. Because I've seen loads of friends buy stuff on credit cards and there's 0% interest to start with, but then you get whacking great APR on them once you get further into it. So it's about really budgeting, knowing what you can afford. And again, it's similar stuff to being a student, taking those meals with you. And then, I mean, we're in lockdown and we can't go out and socialise anyway, but it's finding things you can do with people once lockdown's completely lifted, instead of going out I'm not suggesting you should never go out, but instead of going out all the time, why not have friends over to yours and everyone can bring bits of a meal and you can socialise that way, rather than going out and spending extortionate amounts on meals and drinks out. Like, think of how much a drink is. When the amount of times we've been out Molly on the Randan with RCN students, think how much drinks are there. And then if you have people round for like house parties, it can be so much more fun, I think, to be in your own environment. So it's just knowing practical ways to save your money. Like, and I am a big fan of, don't take it, you shouldn't feel guilty and be saving and taking out so much that you then you're leaving yourself nothing to live off, because you never know what's going to happen. For instance, my freezer broke the other day. So if I had saved everything away in my ISA, I would have had nothing to buy that. So it's about saving that little amount that you know you can spend and putting that into a savings account that you can't touch, and you just gradually see it build. I mean, even if you are just saving 20 quid a month, that's what, quick maths, 12 quid a month, 20 times 12, £240 by the end of the year. And that's only if it's 20 quid. And that £240 go a long way. So yeah, just pull things in, know how you can work it. And plus there's things like, unfortunately, your NMC registration fee, when you join the register, you have to pay that all up at once. I mean, that hit me like a ton of bricks. So my advice would be for students to know that's coming and save for it. And just put a little bit of money away each month when you're in your third year to save for that, because to join the register, you need to pay it. However, once that first year's paid, you can then pay it by direct debit. So for example, when mine renews in September, I'm going to pay that up by direct debit. And also with the RCN, you get half price membership for your first year. So there are benefits to, well, there are many benefits to being with the RCN, but there are benefits for being a newly qualified nurse with the RCN, in that you do get that half price membership. So just be really cognizant of your money. Because if it becomes a chore and you're scrimping and saving, you're going to really resent it. So just be sensible and plan, really.
Thank you, Craig. That's some very good advice there, and I know I'm guilty of splurging every now and then, so it's something that I need to listen to myself. So my last question is for Claire. So we've got many people find it difficult to start a conversation about family, about money, sorry, to family members and loved ones. How can we make it easier to open up a discussion to ask for help?
I love this question. It comes up time and time again when you've got people sort of coming through with debt problems, and one of the main issues has been that they haven't been able to talk about it, and things have kind of sort of spiraled out of control. I think it's important to acknowledge that there's massive difference between how families talk or don't talk about money. Some are really open about it, and some families where money is treated like a bit of a dirty secret. And a lot of these kind of cultural societal issues as well. So I think there's unlikely to be a one size sort of fits all approach, but I guess some broad principles would be, like I just said, try not to wait until things are at crisis point, because when you're really emotional and very stressed about money, you know, things are likely to be kind of you know, your emotions running quite high at this stage, and things are more likely to break down if you're quite emotional about it. So try and approach it when things are kind of slightly calmer. And I think Craig mentioned this earlier, it's about sort of being honest about the issues, be clear about what's happening. And I think it's, if you're going into a discussion and it's a difficult conversation, if you're really clear about what kind of help you need, and I think this kind of relates to the first point that I made about having a financial plan. So if you go in and go, I'm just not coping, it might, if somebody's very nervous about talking about their finances, that might sort of trigger all the worst kind of aspects of it. So if you go in with a budget, you've already thought about what you need, where your kind of gaps are, and if you're talking to them calmly, and showing them clearly where your shortfalls are, and it could make the a difficult conversation go a lot smoother. I think also, I think it's important to expect some feedback when you're talking to family members about your finances, because everybody's going to have an opinion on your spending habits, and they're not always going to have the same kind of viewpoint as you. So, for example, I know of a student who was trying to talk to his mum about getting some help to top up his rent, but he just bought a new pair of trainers, and so the whole thing kind of didn't go particularly well, because it's not that he shouldn't have bought the new trainers at all. It was just the fact that his mum had a slightly different viewpoint. So I think it's about sort of finding some common ground and not seeing that as an attack as well. That, you know, it's a discussion, and if you're asking for help, then to make sure that you're kind of coming at it from the same viewpoint. But yeah, I completely appreciate that it can be difficult, but I think if you go into it sort of when things are slightly calmer.
Thank you so much, Claire. I think one of the things that makes it difficult as well, it can be like a pride thing as well, like you don't want to admit that you're struggling. But thank you so much. So that was the end of the prepared questions. So now we're going to go through the Q&A that we've had. We've had quite a few questions. So my first question is to Craig. So we've had a question come through. Would you recommend having a student bank account with an overdraft facility?
I didn't have one just because I would have dipped into it. I was a mature student and came into nursing a bit later, and in previous life was not very good with my money at all, and my overdraft grew arms and legs. But that is not to say that I don't think people should have one for when you may need it for emergencies, because quite often overdrafts have a much lesser interest rate than if you were to use something like a credit card for purchases. But I would just be very, very careful what the limit is, and don't keep extending that limit. Like, my advice would always be try not to end a month in your overdraft. If you're in it, try and come out it. Don't continually stay in it. Claire might be able to add something to that. She's certainly got a lot more financial nous than me, but I would always, because it is about that being careful, and it is about being honest with yourself, because you can always put it off for next month and be like, oh, I'll get on top of it, I'll get on top of it. But then it becomes so hard and it snowballs and you push it back further, and then it just you get to a place where it's become insurmountable. So have that honest conversation with yourself, and if you do think you would benefit from an overdraft, just make sure it's small and it's something that your wage brings you out of. I would never recommend having an overdraft that is larger than your monthly wage that's coming in, because then you're never going to be in the red, you'll always be in the black. Or the other way around. I don't know if you want to add anything, Claire.
Yeah, absolutely, Craig. I think you're right. I think it depends what you're using it for. It's often quite easy to extend, but obviously if you're using it to cover your kind of essential outgoings, then it's an absolute necessity. But I think it's that creeping up, isn't it? When you can, and for using for things that you might, they use that analogy, don't they? Whether do you want it or need it, and if it's something that you need. And there is often a shortfall. People can't manage on the student funding they've got coming in. They might not get additional shifts if they're working. So it's the difference between the need and the want. And I would always say make sure it's an authorised overdraft rather than an unauthorised overdraft, because they're incredibly expensive. And yeah, again, you never know when a bank's going to foreclose on an overdraft, so you can't really take it for granted. So make sure that it's a manageable overdraft and that you have some other way of paying it off should you need to, if the bank decide to withdraw it.
Thank you guys so much. I know personally for me, I do have a student bank account with an overdraft, but I've always kept it the lowest amount rather than having it extended, because I know with my bank you have to apply to have it extended, and I've always thought, no, don't get me wrong, I have had times where you do think, oh, should I, shan't I, but ultimately that's the one thing I will say I've always kind of behaved at. So the next question I have, I'm going to give to you, Claire. So we have someone here. I have opted in for the pension. Should I be paying in the same percentage as a nurse/healthcare support worker whilst in my role as a student/aspirant nurse? I've heard that if you opt out of the pension scheme, you are not eligible for death in service. Is this true?
I'll do my best to answer that one. It's more of an employment relations issue, but the choice about whether you opt in or not is entirely up to you. The percentage is set by the type of, or the level of scheme that you go in at, and that is a set percentage. So it's not about paying the same as a nurse or healthcare support worker, it's about your salary, and you will pay a percentage of that salary as per the guidelines around the pension scheme. Death in service, there's two. It's very different at the moment, because obviously the death in service, there's the one that's linked, yes, to your pension scheme, and that is very separate to the one that's been brought in by the government, which is the additional money that's paid to you should you die in service of a COVID-related issue. So you wouldn't get the NHS pension death in benefit if you weren't in the scheme, but you would still be eligible for the government scheme that's been introduced separately. So, it's a very personal decision, and we're kind of almost going into financial advice with, with helping people decide whether they should or shouldn't. Whether or not you are, if this is an additional employment, then you weren't planning on paying into the pension scheme, you might decide to delay and start when you fully qualify, but everybody will be different.
Thank you, Claire. I know there's been quite a few questions about pensions, because I think obviously when you're younger you don't tend to think about it, but yeah. I've got another question here for you. Sorry, Claire, more questions for you. As students, can we claim expenses for purchasing and washing our uniform?
Yeah, you absolutely can. I think this goes back to what I was saying earlier. If you're I guess I probably should clarify that. If you're a student, you can't. If you're paying student level of RCN subscription, but if you're doing your paid placement, then you can claim it back. And the issue here is, and the difference here is, that you need employed earnings in order to claim that particular tax relief back. And going back to what Craig was saying earlier, if you are going to be claiming it back because you're on placement, or even if you're working whilst you're studying, then there's a form on the RCN website that's brilliant. You can just print it off, and then you can send it off to the tax office, and they will automatically apply it to your pay. So you know, you don't even need to spend a long time waiting to get through to the tax office. You can just use the form on the RCN site. So that's for your subscription, your uniform, and yeah, and your NMC. Obviously that doesn't apply just yet, but when you qualify.
Brilliant, thanks, Kay. I didn't actually know about the uniform not allowance, you know, claiming back for washing and stuff. So I'm learning so much.
Yeah.
So I'm just going through some more questions. So this one I'm going to ask to Craig, but feel free to jump in if you have advice, Claire. So we have a question. I want to save for a house, but I have previous debt and IVA from a few years ago. What's the best way for me to get back on track now I'm newly qualified with a full-time wage?
I believe if you've had an IVA, or Claire, jump in and help if I'm wrong, but I believe if you've had an IVA or any sort of insolvency or bankruptcy, it can take up to 5 years for your credit rating to be restored. But in the interim, you can build your credit rating back up by having stuff like credit cards, or if you take out having a credit card but paying it off, not a credit card, running it back up. Or if you have anything that you pay up on credit improves your credit rating score. So if you have a mobile phone contract, that helps improve your credit score. If you buy a car and that's on hire purchase, that is going to help with your credit score. I wouldn't know regards to mortgages, Claire, how you would go about if you've been insolvent getting a mortgage. So
You're doing a great job. I was gonna offer you a job. No, I think you're right, Craig. It's about building up your credit score. There's nothing when you come out of an IVA or any form of formal insolvency, such as bankruptcy or a debt relief order. There's nothing stopping you getting a mortgage. It would just be about whether or not the mortgage companies will provide you with that mortgage. So what will often happen is if somebody wants to get a mortgage before their credit rating is clear, and it will show on your credit rating that you've had an IVA or that you've been bankrupt in the past, is that they might go sort of slightly subprime. So it doesn't stop you getting a mortgage, but you won't get the really good deals that you are able to get if you've got a good credit rating. So there's two ways of doing it. You can wait until your credit, the IVA is off your credit score. So we're looking at 5 years after the IVA is ended. Or you can build up your credit score over that 5 years, take it out before the end of the 5 years, but you might not get quite such good deals. So it's not a bar to you getting a mortgage. It just might mean that you don't get the low interest rates straight away. Is that all right?
Brilliant, thanks guys. I hope that was helpful. More questions, so I'm just going through them now. Question for you, Claire. So we have a question here. Should I take out a pension now, or is it too early? I would rather have the extra money in my pocket right now.
It's funny. I think that's possibly just answered their own question. And going back to what I was saying earlier, it's a very, very personal choice. So there is obviously the advantage of taking out the pension now is that obviously you're building up more. And I think it's very easy. Especially, I don't know whether this is from somebody who's already qualified or whether or not they're a student who's doing a placement. If they're doing the placement and they're starting work a bit earlier, then again, they might decide that they want to wait until they've qualified. If you've qualified, think long and hard about the money in your pocket now, because it's difficult because you're future planning. You know, it's about putting money aside now for when you retire. But there are other advantages as well. I think what I would suggest is that anybody who's qualified who isn't sure about whether or not they take up their pension is to get financial advice and start looking at, you know, planning. And we have members who decide that it's not for them, but often once they've spoken to a financial advisor, they will opt in.
Molly, can I just jump in? Just because like I say, I just had my first wage this month, and I absolutely echo what Claire said. It's going to be everyone's personal choice, but it isn't a huge amount when it comes out. Like, it is. I know when I was in my final year, there was loads of people going, "Oh, do we have to pay this pension straight away?" But it really isn't a great deal. And my mum is a nurse and she's just retired, and the superannuation pension, when you get it, is really actually quite good. And and I would, obviously, the longer you don't pay into that, the less good it's going to be at the end. And I think she would wrap my knuckles if I wasn't in the superannuation pension. Yeah. She would be a part of that. So I think it's about weighing it up, because at the end of the day, it's a bit similar to what I was saying about having that savings account and taking a little bit out each month. If it comes out your wage, it's never there to spend. So it's never going in your bank account, and it's not part of that available balance. And it is about having that future planning. Yeah. But I would say it's really not that big an amount that comes out.
I'd agree with Craig in terms of, if you start work and the pension comes out initially, then you don't know that you've not got it. If you wait, and you know, it's harder then to opt in because you've had that money. So, you know, I think I agree in terms of doing it straight away if you can.
Thank you both. More questions. So we've got a question here that I'm going to ask to Claire, but obviously, Craig, if you feel like you want to jump in, that's fine. What advice can we give to our patients' relatives whose carers allowance will be stopped whilst they're in hospital, and where can they be signposted?
Okay. Yeah, that's, I mean, it's probably more common during COVID, but it's not actually a COVID related issue. In terms of where they would be signposted to, then Age Concern is one of them, because that's UK wide and they're available on the telephone. Citizens Advice, but however, we've had real issues getting through to Citizens Advice at the moment. Age Concern has been a lot easier. What I would say is, if they're not getting the carers allowance, there may be something else that they can claim instead. But obviously, everybody, you know, the benefit system is hugely complex, and to say what you would advise them in their circumstances, it's really difficult to say. Carers allowance is not means tested, but it's sort of, then there's elements of it that are. So if they are in low income, they might be able to apply for universal credit instead. I would suggest that you hook them up with Age Concern, or maybe the Citizens Advice in the local area. Some of the hospitals have welfare services, and they will do visits. It's difficult because obviously a lot of relatives aren't visiting the ward at the moment, so probably a telephone-based service would be the best option. But to give specific advice, it's so hard because it will be on a case-by-case basis.
Thanks, Claire. But yeah, I get what you mean by saying it by case, because obviously, especially money is such a personal thing to each individual, but thank you for that.
Okay.
Another question. Do the RCN recommend any financial advisors, or are there any pointers to look for if we are choosing a financial advisor?
Well, Lighthouse are the recognised RCN financial advisor. They offer free consultation initially, and details of that are on the website. I guess it depends what you're looking for. It depends on the product that you're looking for, whether or not you want to see somebody face to face. Some people are absolutely happy to do things sort of on the telephone. I guess it depends on the urgency of the product that you're looking to get, because at the moment, obviously the face to face element isn't happening in the financial sector in the same way. But yeah, Lighthouse is the RCN's recommended financial product. But I don't know, I would suggest, and I'm probably going off piste a little bit here, is that I would always go by recommendation of family and friends as well. So I tend to kind of ask around. If I'm looking for a new mortgage product, I would sort of ask family and friends whether they've had a good mortgage broker that they've used, because I think that sort of it's, you know, usually a good way of finding somebody who may fit the bill.
Brilliant, thank you, Claire. I know there's a couple of listeners wanting some advice, so thank you very much. Craig, I have a question for you. Do you think that the RCN fee should be less? The jump from student rate to what you pay once newly qualified is huge, and I hear that it is discounted.
Again, I would, unlike with the NMC, which in your first year you have to pay the full amount on a once-off, I've just changed from student to normal membership, and so you do get that 50% discount in the first year, but you can also pay it in monthly installments. So I believe it is either $860 or $680 is what I'm paying now. I think it's $860 over 12 payments in my first year. And again, of course, that's a massive leap from the 10 pence that it is as a student. But if you think about it, that is 2 or 3 coffees like a month, whereas what the RCN can provide as both a trade union and a professional college, I very much believe it is worth it. So it really depends what you want to get out of it. Most people always would join a union like the RCN or others for that employment protection, but the RCN has got a dual offer in the professional college, like all the library facilities, the forums, the branches. What I think is particularly useful, and I found in that transition that I've gone from student to newly qualified nurse, suddenly you don't have access to all of your university library, but the RCN library is there, and it's got all its subject guides. So when you go into a new place, like my first job is in infectious diseases. I never had, most of my placements were surgical, and I never really had a medical placement, and I certainly didn't have an infectious diseases placement. So I've been looking through a lot of that there. I'm also looking at applying for a master's in public health. So I've gone on and looked at all the stuff the Public Health Forum are doing and all the information they've got there. So I think when you consider what you can actually get from the RCN, I do really think it is good value for money, but of course it's going to be up to that individual. And for what you pay a month, I think it's worth it, I would say.
Brilliant, thanks, Craig. I know I've personally find the RCN library really useful, so obviously being a student and using it for assignments and reading and research. So I think sometimes.
Sorry, I just wanted to add, in terms of the RCN are actually doing a review of the fee structure. They're always looking at it. So if anybody wants to feed back into the RCN about the fee structure, then please do feel free to do that, because they're looking at it at the moment.
Yeah, thanks,
Claire. Oh, sorry, Claire, is that part of all the membership review that's happening?
It is, yeah.
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 Oh, there's plenty of surveys going around for that, so jump in and get your voice
feedback.
Out.
Always good to feedback.
I think that's an important thing to think about the RCN as well. The RCN is its members. It's a member-led organisation. So if there's things that people aren't happy with, or if there's things that people want, then you need to ask for them. It's not the staff talking down, it's us asking for what we want. So if people think that the fees aren't right, then that is something to definitely feedback in.
Fabulous, thanks guys. So I'm just going to end with a couple of short questions now. So I'm just like going through them. We've had quite a few questions come in, which is really good actually. So Claire, this is for you. Do we have to get separate indemnity insurance, or is this covered by being part of trade union?
The indemnity itself isn't part of the RCN offer unless you're working independently, but you will be covered by your employer. So for example, if you're doing paid placement, that will be part of your employer indemnity. There is very, very, very rarely any need to get separate indemnity cover, because that will be part of your employer package, is the short answer to that. Again, that's a bit of an employment relations one, but I think that covers it.
Brilliant, thank you.
I think when adding as a student, correct me if I'm wrong, Claire, but indemnity is when you're out in placement in normal times, when you're not being paid, is then covered by your university.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Fabulous, thank you. Another question for you, Claire. Sorry, I feel like I'm aiming all these at you.
That's all right. It's not a problem.
Right, I'm like breathing a sigh of relief.
Does the RCN Foundation provide hardship funding?
Okay, so the RCN Foundation has a benevolent fund which is administered by the Lamplight Support Service in the RCN. Under normal circumstances, it wouldn't be open to students who have student funding in place. Anybody whose student funding has ended for whatever reason can put an application in, but the RCN Foundation does also have a what is called a COVID-19 fund, and that's a separate fund that has been set up with donations that have come in to the foundation. Quite a large donation is being processed at the moment. We had a lot of applications to the COVID fund initially, and that meant that we've had to close it so that we can administer them so that people can hear who've already applied, and it's going to be open again in the next couple of weeks. And students, if they're working on COVID wards and are affected or affected by COVID-19, can make an application to that fund. There's no restrictions there. It's just about whether or not you're impacted. So the answer to that is yes. Keep an eye on the website. The RCN Foundation have got some information up on the website. I would also say that if you've still got student status, you can still apply in England to the NHS Hardship Grant. That's still open, and they've still got money available within the Hardship Grant as well. And in the other 3 countries, then there are provisions available for students in hardship directly through student funding. So there are options available. If you're not successful through the foundation, then through your student funding body as well. They've got hardship funds.
Thank you, Claire. I was actually going to say that I know my university personally, they have a welfare fund for students. So I think it's something that, like you say, as a student status, we can kind of get involved and make the most of it really whilst we're still students. Yeah. So I think that's actually, oh no, one more question, sorry, one more question. Last one to either Claire or Craig, because I don't actually know a lot about this. Can we get a blue light card as a student? I've heard about them, but I don't really know much about them.
Do you want me to go, Craig?
Yeah.
I can. Now, the blue light card, from what I know about it, is available to those who have got an NHS email address. So it's if you've got an NHS email address because you're on paid placement, then you should be able to get one, no problem at all. If you're doing a paid placement and don't have an NHS email address, there are some workarounds, but I don't see any reason why you shouldn't get a blue light card if you're working. As a student, the short answer to that is if you're not on a paid placement and don't have an NHS email address, then you will struggle, I think, to get a blue light card.
Brilliant, thanks, Claire. Something I'll look into myself. I'm going to come out of this rich. Right. One last question to Craig. Do you think we should be paying uni fees whilst not actually there and on placement?
If you can unmute, please, Craig. You're still muted, Craig.
I'm going to come out of this rich. Right. One last question to Craig. Do you think we should be paying uni fees whilst not actually there and on placement?
There we go. Sorry, my computer froze.
So,
this is controversial, Ed. So do I think that we should be paying university fees if you're out on placement? See, move to Scotland and then you don't pay uni fees. No, so it's a hard one because your uni is still there to support you. So at the end of the day, you still do have all your academic advisor or your personal tutor who is going to be there to support you. You haven't technically finished or graduated or received your NMC PIN, so you do still have that student status. So if anything were to go wrong, they are there for you. But yeah, I can totally see why it's unfair. That I don't think any student deserves to be paying fees, and I certainly think that the bursary should be brought back for everyone. So maybe I'm not the best person to ask for this because I don't think it's fair that fees are paid at all. But while we live in the world that we do and things are as they are, so I do think you do still need that support from your university and the people that you know. I know with some of the students out in extended clinical placements I'm working with at the moment, they still do need that regular student contact, particularly not so much your final year students who have completed all their assessments and they're about to come into the workforce, but you've got second years who are out working as band 3s, so they are having face-to-face and regular meetings on phones with their personal tutors. So a university is a business and the staff there need to be paid. So yeah, it's not ideal, but I would say yes, which is very unlike me. Claire, what do you think?
I think the RCN, in terms of the RCN stance, is that no student should be paying fees anyway. So I don't think it's a massive leap to say that under the circumstances that we're in at the moment with students on paid placement, that absolutely they shouldn't be. And again, I would say that if, the RCN is campaigning on behalf of students, but if you've got some really strong opinions, which I would imagine that everybody would do, then feed them back in to the RCN so that we can pick them up. But yes, in principle, because we're campaigning for no fees, then this is unprecedented circumstances. But yes, I'd agree.
And I absolutely think that any student who because I know it's different across the 4 UK countries, but any student in England, and I would encourage everyone to actively campaign and write to their MPs, student debt should be wiped. There's no way, when all these students have come out and are working in, I hate the term, working in the front line dealing with COVID-19, there's no way they should have all this debt. They shouldn't have had it to begin with. So there's no way that they should have it now when they are really having to do work that they never dreamed they would have to do when they were students. And with the best will in the world, yes, people still have student status, but they are now out there working, and other nurses are stretched, and they are doing more than they ever would have done as students. And with even the best people working with them, it is going to impact on their student status. So absolutely, I would say to campaign to have that wiped. I know the RCN is doing it, and I would always encourage, if you've got any issues, to write to the RCN, but also to campaign to your MPs and develop that political literacy to be able to do that. And that's just my soapbox.
Brilliant, thanks guys. I love the discussion. So that is the end of the questions. Thank you for letting me add one more and then add one more and then add one more. So I want to say thanks to you both for giving up your Friday evening. I would say, would you rather be at the pub, but then, you know, they're not closed. Well, they are closed, but they're not open. You know what I mean. So thank you both for joining me tonight. I want to say thank you for the AV team for getting us all geared up and making sure things go smoothly. I also want to say thank you to Heather, who has been kind of behind the scenes as my co-host, and thank you to you guys at home for watching. The recording of this webinar will be put up onto our YouTube channel, and any questions that have not been answered, they will be collated and answered via the RCN Students social media channels. And next week we are having a webinar discussing the students that may have opted out of the extended placement on Tuesday, I believe, next week, but that will be promoted on our social media channels as well. Also, just a bit of a plug, at the end of the webinar, the newly qualified nurses website will be on display. So if you are going to become a newly qualified nurse, I would suggest you go and have a look, as the lovely Craig spent his morning designing it, and it looks absolutely brilliant. So yeah, thank you guys, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.